This video is 100 tips for playing Frontline in World of Tanks. You want to cap as quickly as possible, and on certain maps such as D, E, and F, you have to advance as quickly as possible. And I've had games, it always happens on E, where I will be a slow tank, such as I was playing the VK100-01P, and I would be on the cap for B, and because I'm a slow tank, I would be the last one on my team to arrive at the E sector, and you would see all these green dots in front of me. But what would happen is my team would just refuse to advance, and I would actually drive past everyone and get onto the E cap while my allies just didn't do it. And I check, I press tab, and I'll be telling them, they only have 3 people defending, and your team doesn't advance. And it's really dumb, and it happens all the time. So you want to advance as quickly as possible. You want to know how many enemy tanks are out there, and if there's no threat, just keep on advancing. There's little reason to delay and advance. Whatever you're worried about, everyone's worried about getting hit by an enemy. Take up a more advanced position where you're not going to get hit by an enemy. If you look at this, we've got lots of tanks over here that are not in the most advanced position. There's no one that's going to hit the tanks that are in the back, but yet they're too slow to advance. Now, obviously, with this, it's a weakly armored tank, so he's not going to necessarily be at the front line. But with a lot of these tanks, all these other tanks over here, heavy tanks and the T-26E4, they're all capable of being on those front lines. And these light tanks are all capable of sneaking up and being in striking distance of the cap. So advance as quickly as possible. When you're going to reset cap, ideally you want to use an autoloader. For example, if you're spawning in and you have to go reset the cap, you want to come in with a tank where you can fire off shots as quickly as possible. And it doesn't have to be an autoloader. You can also do it with a tank that has a fast reload, such as a T-92. For example, a 1357 GF fires very quickly. However, resetting cap usually has to do with dealing damage. So you might want one that does a lot of damage. At the beginning of the game, if you're assaulting, it's possible to cap A, B, and C very quickly. I've seen it in 2 minutes and 10 seconds, all 3 get capped. And if you do that, you're going to have like 15 or 16 minutes to finish the rest of the game. And you might even have a good 12 to 15 minutes just at the final objectives. The fastest I've seen somebody cap, I saw someone cap B in about 45 seconds. So be aware that it is possible, and it's a good strategy. One of the strategies that I use is I try to stay near the cap. I defend the cap, I reset the cap, I snipe tanks that are trying to snipe into the cap. So basically, I defend the cap. I prioritize the cap because it's really important for the game, and you get a lot of prestige, etc. And you'll notice that if you look at the position that I chose a position that gives me all that flexibility. I can snipe back at enemy snipers, and I can stay close to the enemy. This is a situation where I just went in for a run, and I hit the defender in the IS-3A, and I'm on my way out. This is me shooting at those snipers in the distance. This shows how I'm using the house while I'm reloading so that they can't snipe back at me. This is me sniping on the cap but hitting around that rock. And this is me sniping onto the cap as the enemy is coming into position. So I position myself to be defensive, and you can do it for many different caps. Sometimes you do it by being right next to the cap, and sometimes you do it by being far away from the cap. So, and also there's like cap B, you can play close to the cap or you can play far away. But basically when I set up my position, I determine what the best position in the game is to cover that cap, and then I play that position. Don't sit right next to a cap and do nothing if you're attacking. What they're doing is a very bad play style, and it will destroy their game. It's going to make it a lot more difficult for them to win because they're not on the cap. There's a couple different reasons why. Number one, there's going to be many situations where there's no one defending the cap. And if you're sitting there doing nothing, you're just wasting time. The other reason why is because when you're not on the cap, the enemy is going to be sitting behind the rock. They know you're not on the cap. And if you're just sitting here waiting, all you're doing is giving the enemy a chance to reload their ammo or to go and repair their tank or go and resupply their tank. Or if they're an autoloader, they're going to be reloading. And if it's a 40-second reload, then you're giving them time to reload. And if it's artillery, you're giving artillery time to reload. And you're giving time for all their combat reserves, the artillery strikes and the air strikes. You're giving them time to restart all of those things. So when you just sit by the cap, you're not doing any benefit for your team. You want to be on that cap and get that timer running all the time. If you think you might die, just get off the cap. It's better to be on the cap running the timer and get off if you think you might die than to not try and get on the cap. In this particular game, or actually there was another game, we had a real problem because the guy just refused to get on the cap. It was a T-28 prototype. And what he didn't realize is that the enemy is not only repairing and resupplying, but I'm sitting here trying to give him sniper support, and I have nothing to shoot at. So I'm not doing any damage to enemy tanks. And all you're doing is making your situation worse when you don't try and get on that cap. It's worse for everybody. It's worse for your snipers. It's worse for the cappers, and it gives the advantage to the defending team. So don't sit by the cap doing nothing. When the enemy is capping, you can use artillery strikes and air strikes to delay the capping or reset the cap. This is cap E. What I do is I'm always watching to see when the enemy is capping and what the progress is and whether or not enemy tanks are spotted there. And I try to do whatever I can to help the cap, which is either a recon flight or dropping smoke on the snipers. Or in this case, you want to drop artillery and airstrikes and do damage to as many tanks as you can. Now, you might not get a lot of experience and you might not get a lot of damage, but I don't play to maximize damage. I play to win the game. So if resetting the cap wins the game, even though I don't get as much damage or EXP from doing so, that's the strategy that I'll play. So keep an eye on those caps. And the other thing that you might want to do is if you see that the enemy is capping, type a message in chat to your allies and remind them to drop artillery strikes on whichever cap needs it. If you like to cap, you want to use the engineering combat reserve. You're going to notice that on this particular tank, I have the engineering combat reserve along with smokescreen and recon. The engineering combat reserve can have the amount of time it takes for one person to cap. So you can cap a lot faster. The other thing it does is it allows you to block the cap. For example, if an enemy runs onto the cap and he has engineering, they have to kill him. Otherwise, the enemy base capture will be paused. It will say that it's blocked. And there's a strategy that works on cap A where you can sneak on and hide behind a rock and nobody will know you're there and you can block capture. And the other thing that happens is if you hit an enemy tank to try to block capture, you can double the amount of time. Like if it's 5-second delay, you can kick that up to 10 seconds. So if you like to cap, you're going to want to use that engineering skill. When you're assaulting, you want to find the safest route to get into the cap. For example, when you use A, everybody knows that there's an opening in the south, but the problem is sometimes the enemy is pre-aimed on that opening and there's a little slope next to that opening, and you can actually go over the slope to get into A. With B, what you can do is you can go around the southern point and you can go up this little ledge and sneak into B. And there's a point right over here where there's like a gun pillbox and you can go behind it and it gives you a safer way to get into B. With D, what I usually do is I go through the water and I stay as low as possible. And even when I get into cap D, there's a place where I knock a tree down and I just pull into D. With E, I guess there's a bunch of different ways to get into E. With F, I usually go through this lower area, this lower corridor, and I get to this point over here right south of F, and I check to make sure that the coast is clear before I go into F. After you reset the cap, you want to have a plan for what you're going to do to get out of that cap. And I'm going to show you what I used in this particular example. I have an autoloader, which is the EML. I had four rounds loaded. I ran in, looked for whatever I felt was the weakest tank, the weakest armor, hitting in the rear, the side, lowest number of hit points, etc. And as I ran out, I made sure this is the front of the tank and the back is facing the enemy, because I'm running towards the bottom of the screen in this case, and I'm making sure that this rock is blocking so that the enemy can't shoot back at me. And I have the gun auto-aimed on one of those tanks because the frontal armor of the turret is stronger than the rear of the turret. So if they come around and try and shoot at me, they're going to be going after my stronger armor as I'm running away. And obviously you could reverse away, but it's just not fast enough reversing away. And I have a route that's going to make it difficult for them to shoot at me. If they want to shoot at me, they have to expose themselves more. And I already know that there's no obstruction. I'm going to be able to drive. It's going to go over a little hill. And then once I get over that hill, they won't be able to snipe at me anymore. So if you're going to reset the cap, make sure you have a plan for how to get out of there safely. Have an escape route. Some caps have a lot of objects on the cap. It's true for D and it's true for E. And if you're on the defending team, you want to be able to snipe into those caps, so you don't want those objects there. So if you have time, knock down all these objects. And the same might be true for the resupply points also. If you're retreating and you have to go through a resupply point and you know the enemy is going to show up on that resupply point, make an effort to knock things down. If you're a new player, it's very important to learn this. In order to reset the cap, you have to kill the tank. Just damaging it or tracking it does not reset the cap. So make sure that when you go in to reset that cap that you have a kill strategy, which means going after the weaker tanks and the lower hit point tanks and maybe ramming or shooting at them, leaving the cap while you reload, coming back and shooting again. So you might have to zip in and out, etc. If the game is about to end and you have not captured all of the bases, what you can do is get something called overtime. And in order to get overtime, you have to be on the cap at the moment that the clock runs down to 0-0. So what you want to do is rush that cap and arrive there before it gets to 0-0 and make it so that you stay alive when it reaches 0-0, and then you'll get overtime. However, once you start that capping process, if that cap is completely reset, meaning all the tanks drive off or are killed, the overtime will end. So that's one of the strategies you want to use, and you probably want to practice doing it, especially if you play fast tanks. Caps D, E, and F have to be a higher priority than A, B, and C, and the reason why is because they unlock the final objectives. Obviously, you only need to cap one of them to unlock the final objectives, but if you have a choice between C, A, B, and let's say you got to do D, B, or C, you definitely want to go for D. Unlock those final objectives. I had a game where we unlocked B and then E, and then we won the game, and I don't even think we got A and C. So it is possible to break through by getting the final objectives unlocked and prioritize those particular caps. One of the things that you can do, you don't always have to kill the tanks on the cap. You can push a guy off the cap and use that to reset the cap. So if you've got a stronger engine than the enemy tank and you're trying to reset the cap, try pushing him off, especially if he has full health. When you're on the assaulting team, you really want to cap as quickly as possible. I have seen a game where the enemy capped A, B, and C, all three caps, in 2 minutes. it took like 2 minutes to get on one cap, and then 5 seconds later they got another cap, and then 5 seconds later they got another cap, and they ended up with some crazy amount of time, like 15 minutes at the end of the game to kill off the final objectives, and they ended up winning. So you significantly increase your chances of winning and doing lots of damage and getting lots of EXP if you cap as quickly as possible. And likewise, you want to defend as quickly as possible. So not only do I think it's a good strategy for A, B, and C, but also for D, E, and F. Another example is I played a game where it took like 40 seconds for the enemy to cap B, and it was the quickest I had ever seen. I forgot to mark the replay, so I don't know where the replay is. But that is how quickly they were able to do it. So try to cap as quickly as possible. And everyone's going to say, well, you know, I want to snipe and I want to do damage. I would answer, get on the cap and snipe from the cap and do damage from the cap. I mean, it's the same basic thing. One of the issues regarding overtime, it's not really fully explained, but if you get overtime when someone is capturing a base, you might be playing and then suddenly the game ends. And the reason why is because if you're in overtime and the enemy resets that cap and kills all those tanks, or if the ally gets off the tank, the overtime ends and the game ends. So that's one of the issues about overtime. You might, you know, I thought it was a bug in the game because we'd be in overtime and then we didn't get our full time, but it was because the defending team successfully reset the cap. If you outnumber the enemy, a good strategy is to rush the cap as quickly as possible. You'll definitely earn a lot of prestige points, and you'll have a lot more time to battle at the final objectives. Certain caps, such as A, F, D, and E, have a little bit more open area, and it's easy for you to run around the cap area to see who's trying to defend it. You can't really do it for B, and for C, I mean, it's possible, but it would be very dangerous for you to do it. So for example, it would definitely happen often for E. What I do is I try to make a run in the area to see if there's any enemy tanks nearby. And it often happens for F. There's a ridge over here, and if there are enemy tanks over here, I try to scope them out first, and I try to kill them first before I try to cap. I would say with F, it's going to happen most often. So scope out the area if you plan on capping before you actually do the capping, and try to get your allies to kill those tanks, or if you have to, kill them yourself. You want to use smoke screens whenever your team is capping, and often for your snipers when they're defending the cap. So in this screenshot here, you can see that a lot of smoke was laid down, and it's possible that I actually may have laid the smoke down. And what it will do is it will definitely help you cap. And I try to save my smoke screens in anticipation for when I'm going to cap. It makes a big difference. It forces the enemy to come to where you are in order to reset, so their snipers won't be able to do anything. But I will say that if they do fly a recon flight, there is a chance that they can spot tanks in the smoke screen with recon flights. For example, if you're hiding in a small bush, you will get spotted by a recon flight. So use your smoke screen if you're capping, or if you noticed on the map, you see that your allies are capping in a different sector, drop smoke on them in order to help them cap. This is an example where I'm offering sniper support to my allies who are trying to get on the cap. And when I play a sniping game, I always try to set up a position where I can cover the cap as much as possible because I want to have an impact on the game. There's certain sniping positions where your team is likely to hold that position throughout the battle. However, there's other positions. If you look on the right of the screen, there's positions where the T-44 is that you could lose those positions. So be aware of that type of thing, especially if you're trying to cap. You have to watch your sniping positions and check to see if they fall, because if they fall, you might have to reposition in order to adjust for the fact that you lost sniper support on a certain flank. Sniper support can fall very quickly, so be aware, have good situational awareness. One of the strategies that I use when I play is I do absolutely whatever it takes to reset the cap. You'll notice that there's some tanks over here that died and this vehicle over here. And the reason why is because you get tons of prestige points when you reset the cap. And also you're doing a really good thing for your team, especially if your team is helping you reset the cap. You never know when someone's going to drop an artillery bomb, or your SPG is going to fire, or a sniper is going to fire, or you're going to reset and then one of your allies is going to come in and finish the job. I've seen so many crazy battles where going in and resetting the cap, even if you fail, was the right move. You can get a lot of prestige points. You know, with the prestige, you've got like 5 levels to get up to general. And if you get up to general, you get crazy bonuses to your EXP. So you get amazing bonuses by leveling up your prestige. And by resetting the cap, if you're the only one that does it, you go up over 1 bar for prestige. You go up a complete level. So if you're at the beginner, you start at private and you reset the cap, you'll go all the way up to the next level and a little bit more. So my theory is, especially if you have another tank that's ready to spawn in, do whatever it takes to reset the cap. Even if there's a high chance of failure, the only time I won't go in is if I know that it's going to be absolute failure. For example, if I know that I have no allies anywhere nearby and I'm the only one going in, and maybe I've got to go up against a lot of tanks and I'm not going to make it in time, if I think I can get one shot in, because easily you have to be able to get multiple shots in, because you have to get that one shot in and then you have to wait for the reload. But what happens if you have a 10-second reload? Is it going to be possible for you to reset if there's 9 seconds left? Even if you get that one shot in, they're going to cap before you reload. So I weigh those different things, but 99% of the time I go in for the reset. The only time I'll turn around is if I really don't make it within firing range. Like if I'm about to crest this hill and it's about to click to 0, maybe I'll turn around and run. But you should try, because practice is what's going to give you the skill to make the determination of when to do it and when not to do it. When you decide that you want a cap, make sure that you have sniper support before you get on to that cap. Now, this is an example where we have an IS-3 and a Tiger II that are on my team, and they're near the cap, and I am the sniper support for those vehicles. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to look at your mini-map, and you have to have an idea of where you want your sniper support to be, and make sure that they're there before you get on that cap. And if there's no one there, ask someone on your team to respawn or to take up that position, or check to see if your allies are headed in that area, and then wait until the optimal opportunity before you get on the cap. Don't worry so much about the enemy. If you have sniper support, they'll take care of the enemy. When you use combat reserves, you probably want to hide first. And the other technique that I do is I'll hide and I'll aim my tank in a direction away from the enemy, and then I'll hit like the F key and I'll slowly move the tank in reverse with like a large rock structure. So if someone saw me go hide there and they think they're going to drop something on me, I'll have moved away at a slow speed. And the reason why you do this is because you don't want someone to drop artillery on you while you're away from your interface. Or you don't want to be out in the open and then you're trying to drop an arty strike and then someone's sniping at you, or artillery is bombarding you, or someone comes and rams you. So always make sure you're in a hidden position. Or the other time to do it is maybe when you're on the repair and the resupply facility is another time that you might want to drop an airstrike or an artillery strike. So often I do that. When you're going to drop an artillery strike, you have to pick a tank, obviously, that you're going to drop it on. You're going to want to look for stationary targets, ideally tanks that are not moving, or tanks that are moving very slowly, or that are in the process of turning. They're often going to be the super heavy tanks, or they're going to be autoloaders, because autoloaders have to stop and reload somewhere. and artillery, so get in the habit of doing that. You can go after moving tanks, but you're going to have mixed success. One of the things that you might want to do is ask your allies to either drop a smoke screen or drop artillery in order to help you in any particular situation, whether you are capping or, for example, there's a bridge over here. After you go to the resupply facility, the attackers will cross this bridge, and what I often do is I'll put smoke screen so that my allies can cross the bridge, or so that the defenders can be within the smoke screen, because I know a lot of tanks are going to show up over here. You'll notice that in this particular game, someone is dropping artillery on the other side of the building, but what he doesn't know is I'm capping from the other side, which is just one of those little secret spots that you need to know about. So don't be afraid to alert your allies. What I do is I'll type in chat, I'll say drop arty on cap E now, or drop smoke on cap F now, etc. There's a feature called Inspire, and it draws a circle around your tank, but I'm going to refer to when other people are using it. And what it does is it adds, for example, maybe 15% to your crew skills. You get that bonus when you're within the Inspire circle, and when you leave that circle, you also get, for example, a 10-second bonus. So if the Inspire circle counts down and it's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and let's say it gets down to 1, and then you leave the circle, you're still going to get another 10 seconds. So keep that in mind. The engineering reserve has no cooldown. You can use it immediately upon starting the game, and at any point in the game, from the beginning until the end, whenever you're in game. All the others have a cooldown period. So if you don't know how to use it yet, or if you don't want to learn the combat reserves, I recommend engineering. It's a lot easier to use. When you choose your combat reserves, make sure you do so carefully in the order that you add them. And the reason why is because if you add smokescreen, and let's say you have 10 different tanks, I probably have like 20 or 30 tier 8 tanks. If you add it and then later on say, oh, I don't want this to be my primary combat reserve, you have to manually go to every single tank, and it's a pain to change the ordering. It is absolutely a pain in the neck. It takes a long time. It could take 10 or 15 minutes to go through and reorder everything, and it's very slow. So make sure you choose very carefully the order that you pick each one. The first one you pick will be used on every tank, and the third one you pick will be used on light tanks, and the second one you pick will be picked on the tanks that support 2. Some of the tanks, I believe heavy tanks, might only support 1. When I first started playing Frontlines, I used artillery strike and airstrike and then engineering. And, you know, it was fine at first, and I did have a game where I did 750 damage with an artillery strike. But overall, I think, and it might not be true for every player, because obviously with SPG, you might want airstrike and artillery strike, but overall I've changed, and now what I think is the best one is smokescreen. And I make this the first on all of my vehicles because I have a capping strategy. My strategy is to win the game. It's not to earn prestige. It's not to become general. It's not to get EXP. It's not to kill. It's not to do damage. It's to win the game. So I use smokescreen, number 1, in order to protect the cap. And I use recon flight, number 2, and I use engineering, number 3. I have never used Inspire, not a single time, out of hundreds of games. So I think you might change your strategy as you're playing. The other reason why I tried smokescreen is because I'm trying to get more EXP from assistance damage, which you can earn with recon flight and smokescreen, and I think you can earn it also with Inspire. And I've been practicing, and I haven't really gotten there yet. I've done lots of recon flights which don't do any damage, and smokescreen, you know, a lot of times I really don't get any assistance damage, but I'm learning how to play it, and I want to release a video which is going to show how to use smokescreen, where to lay it down, all the different techniques on how to do it. It is the most complicated of all of the different combat reserves, and I'm not the only one. I heard another YouTuber also identify the same thing, that he believes that smokescreen is the best one. But, it took me a while to figure out how flexible it is and how important it is. In the game, you have various combat reserves, such as the airstrike, the artillery strike, engineering, inspire, etc. So one of the tips that I have, if you're using something like airstrike or artillery strike, you want to use it as quickly as possible if there's a good chance you might die. So what I do is, when I do use these, I don't use them anymore, but when I did, as soon as they became available, I would make use of them. Now, it's true that there's strategic times to use them, such as if you want to reset a cap. However, in general, get in the habit of using them quickly, because if you die, then you lose the ability to use them. The same is obviously going to be true for things like recon, flight, and smokescreen. One of the other things that I do, I try to make sure that I'm in a safe place before I use these, like I'll hide behind an object, or I put my vehicle on auto using either the R key or the F key, the auto throttle, moving at a slow speed, at the slowest speed. So this way, while I'm using this mode, it decreases the chance that someone else will attack me. So now we have Inspire. I've never used. Engineering is good because it's always working. You don't have to turn it on and off. So of all of these features, if you don't know which one to use engineering. It will always give you a bonus when you resupply and when you capture and when you reset capture. And like I said, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to turn it on and off. And it works immediately when you start the game. So this is a good combat reserve to start with. The artillery strike and airstrike features will work anywhere on the map. And the same is true for smoke screens and maybe some of the other features. So be aware that you don't have to just drop it in the sector that you're in. You can scan the entire map and look for the ideal place to drop the artillery strike. And it takes a long time to scroll the map, but if you use the mouse wheel and zoom out, you can scroll across the map faster. I'm going to go through the combat reserves, and I'm going to tell you my opinion of all of them. Artillery strike is the one that I like to use at first, even though I don't use it anymore. And the most damage that I got out of it was 750 damage, but it's typical to only get 50 or 100 damage. You don't really get that much damage. It is good for resetting cap, especially if you're going after a lightly armored vehicle. You can definitely do a lot of damage. Airstrike is good if you're resetting the cap and you don't know where the enemy is, because it covers a wide area, so you can hit a lot of tanks at the same time. It really doesn't do that much damage, but I've seen people use it effectively. Engineering is good because you don't have to worry about turning it off and on. It's always on from the point that you start the game. And it gives you bonuses for capturing and resupplying and things like that. And the bonuses are pretty good. I've never used Inspire. It gives you an increase to crew performance. So if you're at 100%, for example, it could give you 115%. And not only that, it can inspire other vehicles. And I believe that if someone is in your Inspire circle and they do damage, I think you get extra points for it, but I'm really not sure. Recon flight is one of the ones that I like to use, especially if I'm sniping. Depends on what tanks I'm playing. I've been trying to level up my Rheinmetall Borsig, which does a lot of sniping and it requires recon. And the other reason why is because I keep hoping, well, if you recon somebody, they get spotted for a long time. They could be spotted for 30 seconds. And you get spotting damage. So my idea was, well, if I can spot these tanks and a lot of damage gets done, I could do a lot of spotting damage, which is good for EXP. But in practice, it just never happens. So it's useful for spotting. But like I said, it takes a lot of learning before you start getting that great, perfect use out of it. For example, if the enemy is capping and you don't know where they are, you could do a recon flight over the cap and you get a lot of good use out of it. But other than that, I'm not that happy with it. So then the smoke screen is now the feature that I use as the base combat reserve on all of my tanks. And the reason why is because, first of all, you can use it for your allies, and if they do damage in the smoke screen, you'll get some sort of extra points. And I cap a lot, so I want to have smoke screen when I'm on the cap, and I use it to help my allies. If I see that my allies are on the cap, I'll drop a smoke screen. It has a lot of uses that are very strategic. I'm still learning how to use it. For example, you could put a smoke screen halfway between you and the enemy. Is just one of the examples of how I've seen it used before. So I'm learning to use smoke screen, and I wouldn't be surprised if you, as you play the game, you might also find this is one of the more useful combat reserves. If you're playing Frontline, you may have directives which give you certain features. For example, this first one will give me camo for all my crew skills. You might have a tank that you want to play. Perhaps you have a rental tank, or, I have 5 crew skills. It says ×4+1. I've got 5 crew skills on like 140 tanks, but you might not have that. So you might want to go in and look at your crew skills here and add something that's missing when you play Frontline. Like Sixth Sense is going to be one of the important ones that you might want to add, and maybe concealment. And you can also do it for equipment. And the other advantage to using these in Frontline is you're going to get a lot more game time using this in Frontline than you would with a random battle. With a random battle, you might only get 5 to 7 minutes out of game time. But with Frontline, if you're alternating between 2 tanks, you might get a lot more game time. And I think that Frontline is a lot more fun. So you might get a lot more value using directives and even consumables such as gasoline. You might get a lot more use playing Frontline. If your tank dies and respawns, you only have to pay for the consumable once. So you get a lot more value. And if you're a really good player, you can play an entire 25-minute game with just 1 tank. I've had it happen to me, and I've seen other players do it. When you play Frontline, you might find that you don't use the repair kits and the first aid kits as often as you do during random battles. So you might not want to bring them into the game. Also remember that you're going to get flanked from behind a lot more often, potentially during Frontline, so you might get set on fire more often. So you have to, your choice of consumables is going to be different when you play Frontline. And the same is true for equipment. With Frontline, a gun rammer might not be as important. You might want to have enhanced gun laying drives and V-stab because you're going to be shooting from long distances even if you're playing heavy tanks. And I found that binocular telescopes are mostly a waste of time in Frontline, at least from my playing style. With light tanks, I would never use a binocular telescope in Frontline. I did try it, it was a complete waste of time. But if you're a sniper, you might want to use binoculars. I also use camouflage nets a lot more frequently in Frontline because I like to do a lot of sniping with my light tanks, and I was getting spotted too often, and with the camo nets, I was getting spotted less often. There's a piece of equipment called the binocular telescope, which we refer to as binocs. I highly do not recommend this in Frontline mode. I tried it. I tried it probably 2 years ago when they did the sandbox. I was one of the sandbox beta testers. And I tried it, and they really don't work for a couple reasons. Number one, you need to remain still in order to use the binocs, and it's very difficult to remain still because the enemy team, if they're assaulting, they advance very quickly. And you really need it on the defending team. If you're on the attacking team, you really might not use it that often unless you're a sniper. And if you're a sniper, yeah, I guess maybe the binocs are good if you're sniping. But even so, I tried it using light tanks, and it was just a total disaster and a total waste of time. You can't sit still enough for these to be effective, and you're constantly moving around. That's just part of the game because of the wide open map. So I don't recommend binocular telescopes. If you are sniping, I would say that, yeah, maybe it could be useful, but a lot of sniping is going to be beyond your spotting range anyway. So you're going to find that they're not as useful as you might think. I use a camo net on a large number of my tanks. Pretty much all of my tank destroyers and all of my light tanks and maybe even my medium tanks all have camo nets for Frontline. And the reason why is because you're going to get spotted a lot less often if you have that camo net. This particular tank has the camo net. And even though most of the tanks are outside of his range, there's going to be lots of situations when you're sniping and they're within range. And you want to make sure that camo net is turned on before you start firing. So there's going to be a lot of situations where it's going to be useful, and it's more relevant in this game than other equipment. When you play Frontline, you're going to want to equip your tank differently than a random battle. You have various crew skills. You have obviously these different modules. You have equipment. You have your rounds. You have your consumables. You have directives. You have your combat reserves. I do not do it the same way as I would for a random battle. For example, I use camo nets on many tanks in Frontline, which I do not use in random battles. You want to prioritize anything that's going to be useful for long range fighting. Another example is there is equipment for your tracks to make them more durable. And what I would do is I would use it on my light tanks, the enhanced suspension. And the reason why is because I was jumping off of a lot of cliffs and I wanted to have that extra durability of being able to jump off of any ridge that I wanted to, because you can escape a lot of battles. You know, you go shoot somebody and then you jump off the side of the cliff and get away. And I went through a period, it was probably during the sandbox mode, where I was using that standard issue on all of my light tanks, and it definitely makes a difference, but you really have a hard time choosing what you're going to use. Another example is you might not use the repair kits very often in Frontline. The first aid kit I almost never use, and the repair kits I'm almost never using, so why carry them? I use fuel on a lot of my tanks, and I don't use the food consumables, but it's one of the things that you can use as an alternative. So definitely equip your tanks differently. Also for your crew, you're going to want to equip it for fast gameplay. For example, camouflage might not be as important, or maybe it is. You know, I guess repairs might take on a different usefulness. You know, I've been playing wheeled vehicles. Having repair crew skills on a wheeled vehicle is way more important than having it on a tracked light tank. It makes a huge difference in the game. So equip your tanks differently. It might mean changing the way you equip your tanks, and you might have to put some money down to change the way you to change your crew skills. You want to periodically check how many people are on your flank or on your front, as in the game terminology. And you do it by pressing the tab key. And I don't think that you can choose which front. Like if you want to see another front, I don't think you can do it, only because I've tried pushing different buttons. I haven't been able to figure out how to do it. But you can see your own front. And you want to check periodically, especially if there's a lot of things going on. Because what will happen is the enemy will just leave your front. And if they leave your front, there's no sense for you to be there. You're just going to sit there doing nothing, not firing, not helping your team, and your team is disadvantaged somewhere else. And the other thing is the enemy might overwhelm your front, so you want to keep on monitoring what's going on. So I'm often hitting the tab key. And the other reason why I do it is because I anticipate that something might happen. Like, you know that people might leave Cap C, or you know that people are going to go from D into E. It happens all the time. So you're going to start to anticipate when there's going to be a change on the front, and you should use the tab key to give you some information. Whenever I cross from one front into another, which means going east to west, I hit the tab key to see how it changes. And the other thing I do is I notify my allies if I think that there's something really important. Like if I think there's too many people on a front or too few, I'll put, we have 7 too many at Cap D, or we need 3 more at Cap F. I also type in messages. If you press the tab key and notice that there's an imbalance on your flank, for example, in this particular game, there's about 20 or more allies and only 5 enemy tanks in game, and some are obviously respawning, make sure you type in chat and notify your allies if there's a huge imbalance. Like you can type in chat and say, we have 5 extra tanks in D, or you can say, we need 3 more at E. And if there is an imbalance, if you've got missing tanks or extra tanks, then there's probably an imbalance in some of the other sectors. So you have to ask your allies to report what's going on in the other sectors. You don't have to play the sector that you spawn in. You can spawn in one sector and drive to another sector. For example, if you're assaulting, you notice that on the assaulting team, it's very easy to go between A and B. And if you're on sector C, you can come around the west corner and you can snipe into sector B. And obviously, if you're on the defending team, it's very easy to go from one sector to another. For example, what some people will do is if they're defending B, they'll come into A and they'll go up on the ridge to help out their team. Or another thing that you could do is you can go with some platoon mates and go overwhelm another sector. For example, C, a lot of assaulting teams will abandon C. So you have to also monitor using the tab key to see how many people are in your sector and try to gauge if they've left into another sector. Let's say you're in A and the game starts and you press tab and you notice that 4 enemy tanks are gone, you know they went into B. And the same is true with C. If you press tab and you see enemy tanks are gone at the beginning of the game, you know they went into B. However, it's not going to be true if you're in B. If you see that there's missing enemy tanks, you're not going to know which sector that they went into. However, if it's the assaulting team, they likely would switch over into A. So you can switch between sectors. You don't have to play where you were spawned in. However, keep in mind, if you leave your sector, you could put your team at a huge disadvantage. There's a lot of games where we've lost a sector because a large portion of the team just left when we needed them. If you're defending and a lot of tanks leave the defense of A or B and go into a different sector, you could get overrun easily. So don't be foolish. Have good situational awareness of what's going on at every cap. This way, you can make good decisions if you have to respawn or if you need to drive to another sector. I often drive from one sector to another in order to help my allies that need help in another flank, or sometimes I ask my teammates to tell me how their flank is doing, like if they have too many or if they're underwhelmed. For example, one of the things I learned with a light tank, you can go from D to F, it takes about 2 minutes. And I have had games where I helped the team win. There's a video on my channel where I actually drove from D to F in order to cap F, which gave us enough time to end up winning the game. So make sure you have good situational awareness of how your team is performing in all the other sectors. For example, one of the things that happens is often D or F might just be empty. It happens all the time. C becomes empty a lot, and then you can just go there by yourself and cap. There's various ways to go back and forth between the sectors, and some of them are very popular. For example, between A and B, there's a popular entry point. After somebody caps A or B, they might flood into the neighboring sector. So be very wary about what's going on. Have good situational awareness. If one of the caps suddenly falls, make sure you watch the direction that the enemy heads in. And if you're up on a ridge, for example, if you're on the ridge on A, which is on the east side, and B falls, don't be surprised if someone comes around this corner and heads up the ridge after you. So you got to watch your back because you could easily end up in crossfire. There's a feature where you can press a tab key and you can see all of the allies and all the enemy tanks that exist on your flank. And if you look at this particular game, you notice that there's only 7 enemy tanks and there's like 20 allies. There's way too many allies. It's probably triple. There's probably 3 allies for every enemy tank, and some of those enemy tanks are respawning, which means that they appear in red on the list. So use the tab key to check this list frequently to see how your flank is doing. And if there are too many people on your flank, you have to notify your team that there's too many people and they should help another flank, and you want to either drive to another flank, press J to respawn at another tank, or make sure you respawn if you die. And if there's not enough, you want to notify your team that there's not enough people on your flank and advise them to respawn onto your flank. When you have a situation where there's a huge imbalance, for example, let's say you're at Cap C and you're defending and the enemy leaves. So there's only a few enemy tanks and you've got them on the beach and you're keeping them pressed down. I honestly think it's better to just go to another flank than to sit there and do nothing. And the reason why is because as you're sitting there, you're going to be waiting for the enemy to respawn. You're going to have very few targets to shoot at. You're not going to keep that gun firing. It's not strategic for the game. And you're underpowered on another flank. If you're overpowered on one flank, you're going to be underpowered on another flank. So it's better to drive to another flank or respawn at another flank. However, you also have to pay attention to what's going on in the game, and you have to anticipate when you need to return to that flank, or hopefully you'll have allies who will notify you when you need to return to the flank. You really have to learn to anticipate because your allies probably won't notify you. In general, if a flank is overbalanced, don't spawn into it. Don't spawn into a flank where you have too many allies. It's not always going to be true, but in many cases it's going to be true. So there's going to be examples when you will spawn into a flank, and that is obviously if you plan to leave the flank. Or there's going to be special cases where one flank in the objectives is near another flank, and the enemy might be primarily in the other flank, and you might need to be in a different flank and snipe across the flanks. But avoid spawning into overbalanced flanks. When I play, I usually anticipate, when I'm going after the final objectives, my best tank is a fast tank like a light tank. So I usually plan for that. And I'm going to give you the strategy for fast tank. If you're at E, I usually go through the rail lines and head for number 2. And usually the enemy is going to be near this bridge area. If they're not, just keep on going to 2. If they are, take an alternative route. The other thing that you can do is at number 4, where the corner is, there's a building where you can hide inside this little building and snipe at number 4. Another thing that you can do is that from number 2, there's a tall building, I'm pointing at it with the mouse, that you can snipe at number 2 as long as you got good penetration. Or you can go up here where these rocks are and hit the back. These are the safe positions that I run to. Or you can go where I'm pointing somewhere over here by number 3, and you can snipe at number 2 from where number 3 is. For number 1, I like to go to where these 3 buildings are, and I go between these 2 buildings, come out, get close to that building, and snipe over at number 1. The enemy has to do a lot of repositioning in order to get you. And this is the safest place. For number 5, I go to where I'm pointing with the mouse. There's a slope over here, and I hit number 5 from over there. It doesn't always work. It depends on how the enemy defenses are set up. The other thing I do is I come to the red line over here and I shoot from a distance. So those are the 2 choices that I make. And if I have high explosives, I'll come to this position and I'll shoot for number 5. It might work for number 4, I'm not sure. The other thing you can do for number 4 is you want to get to the elevated area at number 4. If you get to this elevated platform, the enemy tanks are more likely to gonna shoot at your allies on the lower portion, and it's more difficult for them to hit you. If they're on this lower portion and you're on the elevated part, it's more difficult for them to hit you because they're not going to see your entire tank, and they're going to be more inclined to see your stronger armor, such as your turret. So you want to go for the elevated position near the stairs where there's a little bit of an object to hide behind. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this, for number 3, you can hit it from the point where I'm pointing at the mouse. You can hit that position if you've got high explosive rounds that do a lot of damage. So there's different positions you want to learn for playing these final objectives. There's certain places where you can play, where you can defend 2 different objectives from one position. For example, when I defend 1 and 2, I try to set up somewhere in between 1 and 2. and when I defend 4 and 5, I get between 4 and 5. Now, obviously, you can't always do this, but ideally, that's what you want to do. If you have a slow tank, you're going to need time to get into position. If you have a fast tank, it'll be easy to mobilize. And the reason why you want to do this is because if you're between the two objectives and suddenly one of them is under attack, you can easily reposition to one objective or the other. So that's the ideal defensive point. When it's time to attack the objectives, you want to go after objectives that are the least defended, especially if you have a fast tank. This was a particular game where I may have been the one who destroyed the objective. I don't really remember, because I come to this position often and I take a shot at that objective number 2 and I run behind the rock, and you'll notice that it's really not that well defended. We've got a bat chat over here, and then if you look on the mini map, you'll see that there's a lot of tanks that are kind of approaching the area, but if they had defended this place, I would have been dead. But they weren't defending the place. They weren't shooting at me. They were too far away. So that's why I ran to this position. So always look at the objectives and look at the mini map and try to figure out which one is the least defended, using the tab button, looking at the mini map, and other techniques that you know. And maybe do a recon flight and use all this information to decide which objective to target. Now, what I'm going to show you is something that is not generally known by World of Tanks players. I've discussed it before, but I've never heard anyone else ever talk about it. And that is that you want to hit the enemy tank, or in this case, the objective, at the point that it's closest to you. This tank is the WZ-132, and it has a certain amount of penetration. But look what happens. I'm hitting the closest point of that objective, and notice that the reticule is green. But look what happens when I aim a little bit lower. It turns orange. And when I aim to the side, it's orange. But if I go back to the closest point, because we're at a little bit of an angle, it turns green again. Just moving it to the side or down makes it less likely to penetrate. So remember that when you're shooting, for example, at objectives or even at enemy tanks, you want to hit at the part of the plate that's closest to you. If you draw the angles on a piece of paper, you'll see that what I'm saying is true. You get a better penetration angle on that closer plate. The other thing is you can shoot at this little thing that's sticking out over here. If this is orange over here, this part over here will probably be green. So if you don't think you're going to penetrate over here, try aiming for this piece over here. One strategy you want to use, if you cap E and F at the same time, I always tell my allies, go for objective 4. And the reason why is because both flanks are going to merge together. And you're going to overwhelm the enemy. The enemy's going to spread out their defenses, and they tend to not be defending objective 4. You know, obviously there's going to be games where they do, but it often doesn't happen. They're going to spread out over here because they have tank destroyers or whatever. So tell your allies, if you see the situation where you've got two flanks that can merge together for objective 4, type in chat, go for objective 4 and merge the flanks together. And you have to be very specific. Merge the flanks together, go to objective 4, overwhelm them. Otherwise, people won't understand. One thing you might want to do is check your AP rounds or APCR rounds and notice where it says average penetration distance, and it says 182 at 100 meters, 179 at 200 meters, 168 at 500 meters. You want to know these values. Now, I don't know if there's a sudden drop-off between 99 and 101, or if it is something that happens gradually. Unfortunately, that's something you'll have to find out externally to this video. But what you do want to know is the difference between the 100 meter and the 500 meter. Notice it says 182 versus 168. Let's check a different tank. And this is 225 to 204. We'll check this one. And this is 198 to 175. And this one is 260 down to 232. This one is 204 down to 181, 245 down to 219, 186 to 163, 217 down to 200, 242 down to 220. So you're seeing, like, let's say around a 10% drop off in penetration values, which means that the further you're away, the less likely you're going to penetrate, for example, the final objective or any tank in general. You're gonna see greater variances in different tiers. In a lower tier tank, like over there, we only saw a 10% difference. But let's look at a tier 2 tank. You see that this is a 20% difference. It went from 50 down to 40. This one went 27 down to 19, which is over a 20% difference. I'm going to check a mid-tier tank. 169 down to 154. 227 down to 200, which is about a 10% difference. So you might have as low as a 10% difference and maybe as a high as a 20 to 25% difference. It's not always going to be tier 8 tanks that you play in Frontline. There was a time when it was tier 10 tanks. So be aware of the penetration drop-off. This objective is 397 meters away. And the way the game works is that when you look up the penetration in-game, it might show you an average value, but there's a drop-off based on distance, and it's different for AP rounds, and it's different for APCR rounds, etc. The penetration doesn't change for HE. So if you're using AP or APCR, you want to know what that drop-off is. You want to know at how many meters there's a drop-off value. So if you're within a few meters, you might want to get a little bit closer to get higher penetration. For example, going from 397 to 387 is not going to give me better penetration, but going from 397 down to 100 is definitely going to give me better penetration. So know what the drop-off values are, how many meters away, and what the penetration drop-off is. Some rounds are going to have a very small drop-off value when you get closer or further away. However, there's going to be some that have substantial changes in the penetration. So be aware of what those values are. If you just cap D, you're either going to have a fast tank, a slow tank, or a moderate speed tank. If you have a fast tank, you should go to objective 1, and if you have a slow tank, you want to go to objective 2. This is a general rule. Doesn't always apply, but in general it does. And the reason why is because if you have a slow tank and you go to objective 1 and you got a lot of fast tanks on your team, and let's say there's 3 or 4 fast tanks on your team, they're going to get there before you do, and they're going to kill that objective before you do. And you're going to be halfway there, the objective's going to be killed, and then you have to start heading towards objective 2, and then the fast tanks are going to get to objective 2 before you do, and you're never going to make it, so you're not going to be a part of the game. So if you've got a slow tank and you're at D, try to prioritize going towards objective 2. The strategy might work for other caps also. If you want to sneak behind the enemy lines and go to, let's say, objective 1 or objective 5, my opinion, and it's not always true, is to go as far north as possible. What most people do is they're going to go through the southern point of the final objectives to get across, because the desire is to get across to the other side of the map as quickly as possible. But you're more likely to run into enemy tanks when you're in the southern point. The good thing about going through this southern point is there's a lot of resupply points, but there's also some resupply points in the north. With the exception of objective 1, that's one that's hard to get a resupply point. So let's say you're at F and you want to go to 1, don't go across this bridge behind E, through the rails to 2 and then to 1. You're very likely to come across enemy tanks. Even if E hasn't been capped yet, and even if D has not been capped yet, you're often going to find weird tanks over here in the background. What I would do is go as far north as possible and take the bridges up here in the north to make it across. And if you're at D, do the same thing. Go as far north as possible, go through this entrance, go across this bridge, and then sneak across to 5. If you want to sneak behind enemy lines with a fast tank and go for one of the far objectives, let's say you cap D or cap F. You cap F, but you want to go and hit number 1. What I do is if we cap F, I'll run to number 2, hit it a couple times as I'm running by, and then continue on to number 1, and I'll sit here. If you do this method, there's a good chance you can kill it or do most of the damage by yourself. The enemy from 5 is eventually going to come after you, and the slow tanks are not going to come. A fast tank is going to come after you, and not only that, there's a good chance it'll be an autoloader. I've sat at 2 and tried to kill it, and I had less success because when they spot you, they're going to be shooting at you from far away, and they're going to have less time to get to you. So it's better to go all the way to number 1. One of the little secrets that very few people know about, right behind objective 3, let's say you kill objective 3, all you got to do is go a little bit down the hill and you can snipe across and hit objective 2. You see where the T-44-100 is? I don't know if you can do it from that position, but I know if you go to objective 3, go down the hill, there's a little bit of a wall, and then there's an opening. You can shoot right across, and people won't know that you're there. They don't expect you to be there. I saw a guy do it, and I haven't gotten to play the position yet, so it's definitely possible. Every objective, and of course every cap and every resupply, has an ideal sniping position, or sniping positions that are better than others. For example, with objective 2, there's a tall building, and you can sit right next to this part, and you're probably going to be able to penetrate that unless you have a really weak gun, and definitely if you're using APCR rounds. And it's very difficult for the enemy to find you here. They have to come around this building in order to get you. You see there's a T-28 over here. He's not going to be able to hit me. So you want to know these positions. Here's one for objective 1. There's these 3 buildings, and then there's this rock, and there's this building here. And it is actually possible to hit. You can see that there was a tank that was right over here that exploded when he was sniping on objective 1, but there are ideal sniping positions that give you a lot more cover. So find those positions. I'm going to make a video that contains all those positions, and you'll find them in my Frontline sniping videos. I don't have yet one that contains all the sniping positions just for the objectives, but it will be in the future. So keep an eye on my account and look for those types of videos. It is possible to snipe at the final objectives from, in this case, 639 meters away. Look at where I am on the minimap. I'm in Sector E, and I can shoot up there. If everybody on my team did exactly what I did, we'd be able to destroy that objective without the enemy even challenging us. So be aware that many of the final objectives have secret sniping positions where you can hit. It's not where the red is pointed right now, but over here on the side using high explosive rounds. You can see I did 68 damage. And in some cases with a high penetration APCR rounds, like maybe with an UDAS or an STRV, I might be able to damage this and do a lot of damage. And I know it's true for objective 1. I know a sneaky spot for objective 3. I know it can be done for objective 5. There's a good likelihood we're going to be able to find one for objective 4. Objective 2 might be a little bit more difficult. So be aware that this can happen. If you notice that damage is being done to an objective, but there's no enemy tanks in the area, you might have to scout around and figure out where the damage is coming from. And also, if you watch my sniping position videos, you're going to, over time, learn where all these positions are, and you'll be able to use them in the game. There used to be a lot more. If you look at my video, which is called Frontline Stealthy Turret Destruction, I show you from 2 years ago in the sandbox mode how easy it was and how much large amounts of damage I was able to do on Objective 2 and Objective 5 and Objective 1, and they changed the maps to make it so you couldn't do it. I was one of the sandbox testers, and I submitted my video to Wargaming, and they approved it so they could see how it was possible, and then they changed the maps. So even though it's possible now, it might not be possible in the future. And if you notice, look at my position on the mini-map and look at where I'm sniping at. You only have a little tiny window that you can aim for. It's a hard position to find. So they're difficult positions to learn. Shooting for the final objectives, you always want to hit them from as far away as possible. This is objective 5. I knocked this tree down. I'm along the red line. Look at where I am on the mini-map. And you can see that the number 5 is at the edge of my spotting range. I can't really be that much further. I did switch to the APCR rounds because otherwise I would not be able to penetrate with the regular rounds. But you can shoot these from even further away. You can be further south and you can hit those targets. So try to be as far away from the objectives as possible when sniping at them. You're less likely to get spotted. There's 5 final objectives for the Epic Normandy map in Frontline. The easiest one is number 2. The second easiest one is number 4. The next easiest one is number 1. The next easiest one is number 5. And the most difficult is number 3. The reasons why is because 2 is usually lightly defended. And what you can do is go through these rail lines and get to 2, or you can drive through these buildings and sneak across and get to 2. And there might only be 1 tank defending, or often 0, but it's rarely more than 1 tank defending, and you can get to 2 fairly quickly. So 2 is usually easy to go for, and you can sneak through and show up there. Number 4 is usually easy because the enemy often doesn't defend inside the city. They want to snipe across the map. So they're going to set up sniping positions, and they're not going to be in the city. And the other reason why 4 is easy is because they can't snipe at you if you're next to objective 4. They have to physically relocate and enter the city and get right into where this position is if they want to damage you and defend. So 4 is the next easiest. The next one you're going to want to go after is probably going to be number 1. You can go where these 3 buildings are. That's a very easy position. It's very difficult for the enemy to shoot at you if you get within this little complex of buildings, or if you get between the rocks and the building. If you come around sniping on the side, the enemy expects you to be there, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But if you can snipe from here with a high penetrating round, it's also easy to damage number 1. So then you're going to move on to number 5. Number 5, you can come up along the red line and snipe number 5. And there's a position over here, if you've got a high penetrating round, you can damage number 5. Number 3 is the most difficult one to attack. However, it's only difficult if the enemy is giving some form of defense. And to be honest, lately I've been seeing more defense at number 3 because people like to sit up there to try and snipe. It's a horrible sniping position. They're not going to snipe at anything. But I'm seeing people there more often because they don't realize that it's a horrible position. And I go up there and I see nothing to snipe at, and eventually I leave. But it's often got only 1 tank is necessary to defend this. So number 3 is the most difficult. If you're defending the objectives, the enemy tanks have to be in a certain position in order to actually fire at the objective. And your natural instinct when defending is to do damage to tanks that are approaching the objectives with the intent of trying to kill them. But one of the things that you can do is you can track those tanks instead, which will delay them. It could delay them for about 10 seconds, and especially if it's near the end of the game. And that delay, it can prevent them from shooting at an objective when doing damage to them might not. So obviously if they're on low hit points and you're going to kill them, you want to prioritize killing them. But if they have full hit points and there's only a few seconds left in the game, tracking them might be the right strategy to preventing them from doing damage to an objective. If you look at the armor model for the final objectives, you're going to notice that the weakest parts are these air vents. These circular air vents, they're like 30 millimeters, and this door is 70, and the back is 90, and the side is 165. I see a lot of people trying to shoot at the front, and they can't damage the front. You see how it says N? That means it has no value. It's infinite. And if you're wondering about this little deck over here, no, you can't damage it. So something that some people will do is they'll come with their artillery and they'll hit the back of the tank to damage it. And I've seen people drop artillery strikes, and believe it or not, seeing an artillery strike, I saw someone drop an artillery strike and damage was done, but I don't know if it was the artillery strike that actually damaged the objective. And the other thing that some people will do, and this really works, when you get to the back, switch to high explosive rounds and shoot for those air vents or this door, and you'll do a lot more damage to the objective. So definitely use those high explosive rounds for the final objective. When you start a game, you won't have, I don't think you start with any combat reserves. I think you start with 0 of these gold tokens. I'm really not sure. But notice that I have 15. And the reason why is because I've got 3 combat reserves that I leveled all the way up, and I never used the rest of them. And notice that I'm at level 30. So what I did was I decided to increase my prestige, which reset it to the 3rd one. And this is what it looks like when you reset to the 3rd one. And then it looks like this, but notice it dropped me down to 1 of these little tokens, and I have no combat reserves. So remember that when you flip it over. Now, the other thing that happens is once I went from 3 to 4, you could only be 2 prestige levels beyond what is permitted for that event. And once I got to 4, I was 2 beyond what was permitted. But what happens is you get stuck at the 1st level, you get stuck with the 1st combat reserve, and you can never advance anymore no matter how much I played. I had to play all day with Prestige 4 at level 1 with only 1 combat reserve, which I decided was Smokescreen. So be aware of that when you flip to the next Prestige level. What you might want to do, it's probably going to happen at the end of the week, you might want to hold on to upgrading to the next prestige level if it's the end of the week and you know that you're already at the max ahead that's permitted by the game. Prestige is useful for winning premium tanks and other prizes. So in this case, you can see that we've got the STA-2, the WZ-111, which I already have both of those. I would like to get that EML 1951. And the secret tier 10 tank, actually I think it's a tier 9 tank. The number above the 4 is not the tier of the tank. These are probably tier 8 tanks. So if you would like some free premium tanks, this is one of the ways that you can get it. You also win rewards every time you move into a tier group. And look, you can get a lot of these directives and repair kits and fire extinguishers and credits. Look at that, 500,000 credits, 5 credit personal reserves, and EXP personal reserves. So there's a lot of bonuses from playing Frontline. And over here you can see that you can win gold when you flip the prestige level. You can get bonds. You can earn premium tanks. You know, I don't see, oh, okay, the bonds are up at the top. And you can see that there's enough bonds that by the end, if you win all of them, you'll be able to get some equipment. I do have 1 piece of equipment that I purchased with bonds. You can get tons of prestige ranking up by capping or by resetting cap. I've had it by capping all by myself. I've had it go more than a complete bar all the way up. So if it says sergeant and I'm the only one capping, it would go all the way up to the next rank, which is captain, and then a little bit more. And not only that, I've been on a cap for a very short period of time with other players and gotten huge amount of prestige and leveled up the ranks very quickly. So capping is very important if you want to level up as quickly as possible. And the same with resetting cap. There's different ranks that you can move up. There's, for example, private, lieutenant, major, captain, and general. You want to get to the highest rank that you can. When you get general, you get far more experience than if you get, for example, private. It's substantially more. The bonus is huge. It's not like a 50% bonus. I think, let's say you play a game and you get 1,000 EXP in the game. I've played games where I've gotten like 15,000 EXP or maybe even more. So you can get a ton of experience and you can really level through tanks a lot quicker by getting a higher rank. There's a lot of people who are very competitive about getting the highest rank possible. One of the ways to get the highest rank, such as general, is to play artillery. You get the most prestige by resetting cap or by capping. And with artillery, it's extremely easy to reset cap. So if you want to get those premium tanks, play artillery. This page shows the EXP bonus that you get by moving up in rank. Notice that if you go to sergeant, you only get a 10% bonus, but if you go to general, you get a 200% bonus. That's really huge. I get major very frequently, and I get general once in a while. I play internationally, so it's a lot harder for me to get general because I got a huge ping time. And it just makes, and also because of the way I play, I don't play to get the most prestige. I play the strategy to win the game, and winning the game might mean not getting the most prestige. If I wanted to, I could just sit on the cap and reset cap and get general every game, but that's not the way I play. So if you want to get that EXP bonus, play to get the highest rank possible. This is going to apply definitely to artillery players, but it also could apply to anybody. If you kill a tank that just spawned in, then there's a good chance that he has to be out of the game for a long period of time. So basically, what I mean is you want to target tanks if you have the ability to or the choice to. You want to target the tanks that just spawned in. They're more likely to have to sit it out for a long time. An enemy tank that's been in the game for a while, if you kill it, there's a good chance that he's going to respawn immediately. So if you have any way of knowing if someone just spawned in, prioritize those tanks. One way to do it, obviously, is to monitor player names. Another way is to watch the minimap and look at who just arrived at the flank. If you know that a tank has been there for a long time and you know that another tank just showed up, try and target the one that just showed up. And if you have the ability to go after tanks that are further in the backfield, prioritize those tanks and you'll get less enemy tanks on the battlefield. Be aware of how many tanks you have ready to respawn and how much time you have before the next tank comes in. For example, in this case, I can be a lot more aggressive. I don't have to worry about dying because I'm going to respawn immediately. But if I didn't have any respawns and I had a long period of time, I might want to play a little bit more conservatively and stay back and snipe and avoid dying. There's a feature that I've highlighted for the respawn mechanics. It's that you can press the J key, and what you do is you hold the J key down and a timer will start. It might be 10 or 15 seconds. And after that time has elapsed, I believe you have to physically hold it down. Your tank will explode and it will die. And it will take you back to the respawn menu and it will allow you to get back in the game in another flank. So it's useful if you don't like the tank that you're playing, and it's useful if you need to switch to another flank. I've actually only used it once, and I've played probably 200 or 300 games. And it was definitely useful when I used it. I was at C, and I probably respawned at D with a different tank. And it's probably going to be often useful in regards to cap C. So if you're at cap C and you notice that there's a big imbalance, or if you suddenly won, or if you need to get to C, your team needs you, consider using the J feature. In Frontline, tanks can respawn, and they will often come after you to take revenge. And it happens very often, for example, on this particular map. When I like to play along this red line, right on this hill over here, because I can get shots all over the place on enemy tanks against their weak armor. And what will happen is I'll often kill a tank, he'll die, he'll respawn, and then he'll come around here looking for me. And it happens often. So watch out for certain positions where someone might come after you. Another example, on map C, let's say you're between B and C, and you go to the position over here and you get behind somebody and he respawns on C, there's a good chance he's going to come looking for you. So people take revenge often in this game. When you're on a resupply point, in some cases, depending on which tank you have, you might resupply very quickly, and in other cases, you might have a lot of time. So during this time, you want to do something that's useful in the game, and there's a few things you can do. One of them is obviously to drop an artillery strike or a smoke screen on someone. But another thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to rotate your tank and put it in the direction that you either plan on leaving when you're done repairing, or you want to put your strong frontal armor towards wherever you think incoming fire might come from. So if you know that the enemy is behind you, you're going to turn your tank around and point your strong armor towards the enemy. The other thing you're going to do, if you don't know where the enemy is, you can usually guess in general where enemy artillery might be. They're always going to be, well, you can pretty much guess where they're going to be. So they're either going to be directly south of you or directly north of you. It might not always be like that. So you might want to aim your armor in the direction of enemy artillery. It's better to go to the repair and resupply as opposed to respawning. So if you can make the choice, go for repair and resupply. If you're sniping on a resupply point and an enemy tank is approaching it, wait until he gets onto the resupply point before you hit him, because if you can damage him when he's physically on the resupply point, you halt the resupply. So that means you prevent him from getting ammo, you prevent him from repairing modules, you prevent him from getting his crew healed, and you prevent him from getting his hit points back. If there's heavy fighting and you're low on hit points, you're going to want to go for those resupply points early. Because obviously you could be destroyed on your way to a resupply point, especially if you have a slow tank. So make sure, what I usually do is when I have 25% of my hit points left, I go for those resupply points. If you're not a good player, you might want to do it at a higher level, like 30% or 40%. Because there are some new players, whenever we finish capping, I remind my allies to go to the repair facilities or the resupply facilities. And I either type it in chat or I'll click on the repair facility so that they can see and get that little reminder, because there's going to be some people that forget, especially if they're new players and especially if it's the beginning of a playing period. For example, if you're playing for a week and it's the first day of the week, you're going to have people playing a little bit more forgetful. And the other thing that I do is sometimes, for example, we're defending Cap C and you see that your allies on low health, I'll type in a message. I'll say, hey, Oho, go to the repair facility. You send that little reminder because they won't think of it on their own. As soon as you win one of the caps, you want to make sure you head straight for the resupply facility and always go to the one that's closest to you. For example, on some of the caps, like A, B, and C, if you're closer to the beach, there is a resupply facility that is close to the beach. Don't skip it and say, oh, well, I'll hit the next resupply, because what happens is you might need that next resupply, and not only might you need it for this tank, but if you die and respawn, you might need that further distant resupply for your next respawn, because the time counts. When you respawn, it doesn't reset the resupply. So always go to the nearest resupply as soon as you're done capping and start heading north. One of the things that comes up is it better to go to the repair facility or to die? You have to really gauge what the situation is. If you have the ability to respawn and you really have to act quickly, maybe it's better to die and then respawn instead of going to the repair facility. However, if you don't have a respawn waiting, which would be the ghosted tank, then it's probably better to go to the repair facility. And my philosophy after playing the game is I always go to the repair facility. And the reason why is because I don't want to wait 3 minutes for a tank to respawn, especially if a repair facility is only 45 seconds away or something like that. So I'll save a lot of time by going to the repair facility, and it gives me the chance to be aggressive and to go die and to respawn again again before I have to worry about the long wait. So my philosophy is always try to repair instead of dying. In this screenshot, you're going to notice that the enemy tank is physically on the resupply area. That's essentially a Carnarvon Action X or AX, Carnarvon AX. You'll notice that that's absolutely where he is. And you want to try and hit those tanks as soon as they get onto the resupply, because if you can hit them, they won't be able to resupply, and they have to wait 3 or 4 minutes before they get a chance at resupplying. So it's a really good tactic. One thing that's interesting about the game is that the repair and the resupply facilities have timers, and the timer is different for every player and every tank. So it's going to take you a certain amount of time to repair, and there's going to be a certain amount of time before you can go back for a second repair. It could be a 2 to 4 minute time period, and it might change whether or not you have engineering and what level you have and what tank you're driving. For example, I seem to believe that light tanks repair a lot quicker, and you can go back and resupply a lot sooner, and a heavy tank, you can't do that. And obviously with engineering, the higher the level, the faster you're going to resupply and repair. So that is one of the differences. If you die and you respawn, the timers are not independent to your tank. So if you go to a resupply and then you die and then you respawn, you have to deal with the resupply delay and the timeout based on your previous tank. It doesn't reset when you die. So take that into account when you're playing. One of the techniques that you can use is you can hold off the enemy at a choke point. For example, this Sector E has it's a corridor map, and what happens is there come certain points where the enemy is afraid to advance. Over here on F is another one. They're afraid to come around the southern corner on F, and then there's these 2 rocks over here where they often stop. So if you pick up the right point, you can prevent them from advancing beyond these points, and just by delaying them, you can win the game. For example, another technique you can use, let's say the enemy is trying to go after objective 5 and you see a tank coming in that's relatively slow. Instead of damaging the tank, you can track it. And by tracking it, you might delay it by 10 seconds, which will give you and your allies more time. It prevents him from shooting at that objective, makes it take longer for him to get there. And if there's only a few seconds left in the game, you can slow down the enemy advance without actually doing damage. You want to try and hit the enemy at choke points as much as possible. For example, this over here is Sector E. And what happens is there's certain areas, such as where I'm pointing with the mouse, where tanks often go through here. So you can wait on the opposite side and snipe through this opening, and you know that they're just going to pass through here. And there's other choke points in the map. For example, they tend to come around the lake over here, or around this way. They cross over these bridges. They often cross over this bridge going after objective 3. So line up shots. I have sniping videos which show you how to line up on a lot of these choke points. There's a certain position which is shown on this particular image, exactly where this tank is. You notice that right in front of my tank, there's a red line. And look at where I am on the mini-map. I came probably from Cap C, and the thing that's good about this is look at my range. I can snipe onto Cap B from this position, and I can defend my team, which is a Scorpion G and the LT 432 and a Mauerbrecher. I can defend them if they get threatened. So what I often do when I'm attacking on Cap B, I'll send a message in chat, and I'll say, could we have a sniper from Cap C to snipe into Cap B across the river, which means to basically come to this position. So if we did have that, that Scorpion G and the LT-432 would not be able to sit in that position. It's a very, very powerful position to be on the southern tip of this area, the southern tip, which is where I'm pointing on the mouse. If a sniper from C comes over here, he's pretty much going to stay alive, and especially if it's an autoloader, and he'll be able to knock out all these tanks. So it's a very powerful move. It's very important to know various sniping positions in the game. Most people go, for example, to the ridges over here, a very common position, but there's many positions you can take up in the game. And taking up various sniping positions are going to give you a lot of advantages that might come into play. Either, like this is a position I like to snipe from while defending Cap A, but I might reposition. For example, these are two positions. I go from here to here, and I switch between the two. So I learn two different sniping positions, and I alternate depending on where the enemy is positioned. When the enemy is in the open, I'm in this position, but when he's no longer in that position, when he gets behind that rock, I switch to a secondary sniping position. So learn all, and here's another example. Normally, I'm at the tree to the right, but when I want to hit these tanks, I move to the tree that's in the center of the screen so I can hit those tanks up there. So learn different sniping positions, and they're all over the map. And I have lots of, right now I have 3 different sniping videos for Frontline that are published, which have, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 different sniping positions. So there's a lot of them in the game, and it's very important to learn them all. When you play in Frontline, expect to do a lot of distance sniping. If you look at this particular tank on screen, he's 447 meters away from me. He's outside of my spotting range. This is very common in the game. So in order to prepare for it, you need to equip your tank with the proper equipment and with crew skills. And the equipment is going to be the V-stab and the gun laying drive, and you're going to want consumables such as food consumables, and you are going to want crew skills such as snapshot, and I know that the smooth ride is another one. So you're going to do a lot of long-range sniping. Also, BIA would be another example. You're going to do a lot of long-range sniping. So make sure that your tanks are prepared for the long-range sniping. You might want to forgo the gun rammers and use a gun laying drive instead. And of course, if you're using an autoloader, then a gun laying drive might be better than the V-stab. If you're planning on sniping, you should always try and spread out. If you look at this particular game here, you'll notice that most of my team is sniping from the same flank. It's going to make it very difficult, and not only are we in a bad location, not only are we all in the same place, but we're in a bad location because the enemy has an open run on objective 4, and they can get out of our range, no problem. So you want to spread out. If your allies are in one spot, take up another spot. And I always spread out. So like if these guys are near me, it's because I got here first and they just followed me is what happened. But what you want to do is spread out, and especially between two objectives, it's better to be between 4 and 5 than to be over here on the far flank, because at least if you're between 4 and 5, you can reposition to the objective in a hurry. After you lose a cap, you have to leave the zone, otherwise you'll get bombarded. And one of the things that I do is, even though I leave the zone, I try to be in a position where I can still shoot at the enemy while they are starting to make their way north. So in this particular screenshot, you can see that I'm able to snipe at tanks that are approaching the resupply area, and I stayed in a sniping position. If you look at my allies, perhaps some of them also did the same thing, but there's many of them that did not. For example, the Su-130PM, I know for a fact that the Su-130PM cannot snipe this resupply area because there's a hill in the way. And all these tanks over here, like the Primo Victoria, I don't think they can snipe from there. Maybe the STRV can and the Progetto can. The Scorpion G cannot snipe from there. The T-55 might be able to, I'm not sure. But when you are retreating, set up positions so that you can still hit those enemy tanks. Because remember, until that timer gets to 0, the enemy also has to remain in their sector. They can't leave that sector. So they're not going to get close to you. In general, speed is more important than any other aspect of the game in Frontline. And the reason why is because of the long distances that you have to travel, whether it's within a sector or to enter a sector or to leave a sector. To be able to relocate, to chase down the enemy, to get from one place to another, to go to a physical location such as a cap or to reposition on a flank. Speed is far more important than armor. I don't use the APCR rounds. I prefer to just get on the side or the rear, and I often am on the rear of enemy tanks. And what I'll do now is if I see a tank in a corridor and I have a fast tank, I will drive across the map to get behind him to shoot at him from behind because they usually don't react fast enough for me to do damage to them. So speed is way more important than anything else. Always take it into consideration when you choose which tank you play. If you're playing Arty, there's certain positions which give you an advantage over other positions. B and E are good sectors for playing artillery, especially E. For example, if you're in A, you might not be able to hit all the way to F, and you might not be able to hit the objectives. And if you're in D, you might not be able to hit into C, and vice versa. But if you're in E, you're going to have the best range for your artillery. So keep that in mind. One thing that's been learned about playing the game is that if you play artillery, you can get general a lot easier because artillery can reset the cap on any of the caps. And during the capping phase, if you can reset caps, you're going to get the most prestige. So you can get higher prestige, and if there's a reward for getting higher prestige, such as a free premium tank, or if you just want to level up through artillery faster, you want to do it in frontline mode. And what you're going to notice is you're going to see a large number of artillery in the queue trying to get into the game because they're trying to win premium tanks or they want to get general. When you play artillery and you're on the attacking team, playing at Sector E is really important. And the reason why is because the highest concentration of enemy tanks is going to be in the city. And from E, you're going to get the largest concentration of targets to shoot at. You have to be very careful when you do passive spotting on Frontline, which would mean sitting in a place or hiding in a bush, turning your binocs on. You have to be very careful because the enemy advances very quickly, especially the light tanks. They're on a mission to assault you. And I am referring to the defending team. On the assaulting team, it doesn't really help as much to do passive spotting. But they will advance very quickly. The light tanks are going to come in first. The slow tanks will come in last. So the first tanks you're confronted with will always be fast tanks, and they're probably going to have a good spotting range. So you have to be very, very, very careful when you do passive spotting. What I do is I do passive spotting, but as soon as I see something, I run away and I relocate to a new position. I keep falling back. If you stay in one position, you're going to die very quickly. You want to avoid passive spotting when the enemy is advancing on your position. Now, in this particular case, I advanced to a position beyond the red line, and what I'm doing is I'm spotting these tanks and I'm trying to shoot at them while they are still spotted by my allies, sniping at them. However, you don't want to passively spot. You want to hightail it out of here because they're going to advance very quickly, especially their light tanks. And whenever I've tried to do passive spotting, if you're in a path that the enemy might take, they're going to advance on you. There are positions, like I like to go to the center island on D to passively spot, and on F, there's a giant open field that everybody is afraid to cross into. I knock a tree down and I passively spot over there. but almost always an advancing army is going to find me. And not only will they find you as they're advancing, but they'll find you with recon flights. And if they do that, you're going to get pelted by snipers. And if it's an advancing army, you're going to get overrun. I get overrun all the time. I have to play a different strategy. When I passively spot, I usually only passively spot for a very short amount of time, like 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And then I hightail it out of there as soon as the enemy shows up. You don't be naive. If you're in a fast tank and another fast tank shows up, you got to hightail it out of there. I don't completely understand certain mechanics in regards to the recon flights, but one of the things that I've learned is that hiding in a bush does not protect you from a recon flight. I had the ELC Even 90 completely hidden within a bush. Someone flew a recon flight overhead and spotted me. So using bushes, maybe even a smoke screen or the camo net is not going to help you stay hidden from recon flights. The other thing you have to remember, normally in the game when you get spotted, you're only spotted for 8 to 10 seconds. However, with recon flights, you could easily be spotted for 20 or 30 seconds. So you have to be aware of that. If you're suddenly spotted for no reason, then it must have been a recon flight and you have to hide for a lot longer. Otherwise, you might get seen if you go into a vulnerable position. So when you are capping, you're often, if there's a heated battle, you're going to need strong armor. And likewise, when you're defending, if you're defending the cap, you might need a gun that has high penetration. In this example, the UDES-03 does 286 penetration, I believe, with the regular rounds. So this thing is going to damage anything. It's going to damage no matter what angle you hit. Almost any tank is going to get damaged, and you're going to be able to block the cap, delay the cap, reset the cap, etc. So use the right characteristic depending on what situation you're in. The other time you're going to use the high pen gun is when you have to hit the frontal armor. For example, if you're on a corridor and the enemy is advancing and you don't have time to get around the side, you want to pull out those high penetration guns. The other time I would use it is when I'm defending the objectives. You want to prioritize the tank based on the terrain or where you are. For example, when you're capping B and C and you're worried about dying, you want to bring in your heavy armor. But the same is true when you're, for example, defending the final objectives. When I'm defending the final objectives, you want to use a high penetrating gun like a tank destroyer. However, if the enemy is overwhelming your positions, you're going to want to use a well-armored tank destroyer like the WZ-131GF, I believe is one of them, the Jag Tiger 8.8. You know, something like a Rheinmetall Borsig or a Scorpion G might not be a good idea if you have a lot of enemy tanks overrunning you, but it might be a good idea if you don't have a lot of enemy tanks overrunning you. So then you have another situation where certain maps like E is going to work really well for heavily armored tanks because there's a lot of corridors, and there's corridors on F also. And obviously the ones that are a bit more open, like D and F, are going to be good for light tanks. Objective 1 is good for light tanks, and Objective 5 is good for light tanks. So if I'm going to spawn on one, I might take a fast light tank, and what I do is I just run around like crazy between the buildings, spotting as much as I can to help my team so they don't have to use up the recon flights. If you go to 2, you want a fast tank destroyer. If you go to 3 or 4, I would use a heavily armored tank, such as a Jag Tiger or a VK101P. If you go to 5, you're going to want to use something with high penetration over long distance, or a reasonably fast tank that you can move around. So pick the tank based on the terrain that you're fighting on, and use the criteria based on the characteristic, the penetration, how much damage it does, how much armor it has, how fast it is, other characteristics, maybe an autoloader. Sometimes, like for example, if the time is running out, I might pull in with an autoloader to defend the final objectives because I know I'll be able to get 4 shots in with rapid succession that I might not be able to do with a regular gun. So pick your tank based on those situations. In general, autoloaders have a huge advantage in Frontline because a large number of the tanks will be caught out in the open, and you want to be able to hit them really fast as many times as possible before they can retreat. This is an example of an enemy tank who wants to rush the C-cap, and if I have a loaded autoloader, he's just never going to make it. I don't have enough shots to kill him, but I have enough to get him to become a one-shot, which means that he'll be vulnerable to my allies who will be able to kill him. So he might think that he can go after the guy on the cap who can only fire back with one shot, but if I have an autoloader and I'm defending, I can get him down so that the guy on the cap can finish him off. So autoloaders are very important for hit and run tactics and just in general in the game. Anybody who gets caught in the open, if you have autoloaders like the Progetto 46 or the IS-3A or the AMX 1375 or any of those tanks, they're going to perform very well in this game. One of the things that I do occasionally is I add vehicles using the compare vehicle feature, and I configure them to put the configuration that I think I'm going to use when I'm playing. And I use this feature, let's say it says average penetration, and I look across and I find the tank that has the highest penetration. So that way I know, okay, if I'm in a clutch and I need to damage some tanks, perhaps on their frontal armor, and I need high penetration, that's the tank that I'm going to play. So use the compare feature to find out what tank to play. You're also going to want to use it for survivability to see which tank has the highest hull armor. In this case, it's the M48 Patton. And you might want to do it also for another feature such as speed or for spotting. I'm just going to go through some of my favorite tanks that I enjoyed playing with Frontline. The Progetto 46 absolutely is my go-to tank. That's the tank that I prefer to start every game with unless I'm leveling up tanks. If I do have some tanks that I'm leveling up, but the Progetto 46 is a good all-around tank. The AMX CDA, I had a lot of great games with the AMX CDA. It's got good speed and it's got pretty good penetration. I have AMX 1390 written down, but I'm pretty sure that's now a tier 9 tank. So maybe it's a Batchat 12T, I think, is a tank. And you know what? I never played the Batchat 12T, but that style of tank, the ELC Even 90, I use this tank when I want to spot without being spotted, or if I want to cap without being spotted as my sneaky tank. So the ELC Even 90 has its uses. A Jag Tiger I would use if I have to put up a strong defense and I want that rapid fire gun if I'm in the town and defending the objectives. The Chrysler K if I want to cap and I need that strong armor. But you know, I have the Mutant, and the Mutant also does really well when capping, and the Defender does also. I love the T92. It's low profile. It's got a rapid fire gun. I guess it's pretty accurate. Like the ELC Even 90 has a horrible gun. It's just a waste of time. But the T92, you can do a lot more close combat. And the VK100-01P I used to enjoy playing. The Waffenträger, I thought I was going to have horrible games. I ended up starting every game with the Waffenträger until I leveled it up. Yeah, that was a lot of games, and I had great games with it. I was amazed at how much damage I was doing, even though it was a low pen gun. If you know that you're going to get into a heavy battle, you're probably going to want to spawn a heavy tank that has strong armor. Armor is going to be a lot more important than the penetration of your gun. So pay attention to what you're getting into. When you play a certain class of tank, let's say it's a medium autoloader, a light tank, a super heavy tank, etc., if you've got a lot of tanks, I have like 140 tanks or something like that, make sure that you've got the adequate number of tanks to accomplish what you want to do. So in this case, we're talking tier 8, and I'm going to look at light tanks, and you'll notice that I have 4 of them. In general, I switch between 3 different tanks, and I'm going to explain why. The reason why is because I'm playing the WZ-132 because I'm trying to level it up. And when I play Frontline, I level up tanks like crazy. The pain and suffering and the grind is a lot easier in Frontline than random battles. So I level up leveling up tanks is my priority. I only go into these other tanks if I have a special need for playing that tank. If this one is either unplayable, or maybe this one, if I want to cap, this is a little stealthy capper. It's rare that I need to get into the M41. This is my last choice. It's rare that the other tanks are unable to be played, because when you die, you have to wait like 5 minutes before you can play that tank again, and you have to switch into the other tank. So make sure that for every tank class, like for heavy tanks, I've got plenty of them to choose from. Make sure you have an adequate number, like 3 or 4 tanks to pick from to accomplish what you want to do. When you play in random battles, after every game, you can make changes to your tank. You can change your crew, you can change your ammo layout, you can change your consumables, you can change your directives, etc. However, in Frontline, when you die and you respawn, you cannot make any changes to these things. So you need to have all of them set exactly the way you want them to be set before you press start, before you press battle and join the game. You want to make sure, for example, if you want to play this tank, you want to make sure that you return your crew. So make sure you check all those things. And not only that, for example, if you have 2 American heavy tanks, you might want to arrange it so that both of them have a crew. For example, you notice that when I switched my crew into this tank, it took it away from the Chrysler K. And if I put it into here, it's going to take away from the T26E5 because it went into the M6A2E1. And if I go to the Chrysler K, guess what's going to happen? You'll notice that my crew remained in the M6A2E1, and the reason why is because these are the 2 tanks that I've pre-configured when I play Frontline, because they have strong armor. These other heavy tanks do not have strong armor, so I don't have them pre-configured to play Frontline. One of the things that I do is I take certain tanks and I make it so that the tank only has high explosive rounds. You can look at this example. This is a VK100-01P. You want to do it with something like a Scorpion G or a Rheinmetall Borsig or something like that. I do it with my Scorpion G. So my Scorpion G only has high explosive rounds. And the reason why is because there's certain situations where high explosive rounds can be used at a huge advantage where regular rounds cannot. For example, if you have to go against the frontal armor of tanks and you don't have enough penetration, or in this example, you can see that I'm shooting at objective 3 from 639 meters away, and I'm doing damage. I did 68 damage on the shot, which is shown over here on the lower left. And I can hit that from far away. Look at the mini-map, how far I am from objective 3. 639 meters. You need HE rounds to cause that damage. So I have a tank specialized for doing that. And you might also want to have a tank that's specialized only with high penetrating APCR rounds. So let's say you have 2 heavy tanks, or let's say you have the IS-3A, the Defender, the WZ-111, the IS-6, etc., etc., etc. Pick one of those tanks and just load it up with APCR rounds only. So if you have to respawn and you're like, you know, F it, I'm going to go in with the highest rounds I can get and just do whatever I can, you want to have that tank ready, because you cannot change the ammo once the game starts. And you're probably going to want to do it every time you play Frontline. One way that you can make more money when you play is find a tank that is cheap to repair, or find ammunition that is less expensive. You'll notice that this is $255 per round, and this is for the T26E5, and the penetration is 230. So let's look at this tank. The penetration is 225, and look at that, the cost is $1,025 per round. Well, how much damage does it do? This does 330 to 550 damage, and this does 280 to 300 damage. So it does a little bit more than half, but it's it's a quarter the price. So you can look at the cost of your ammunition, which is going to be a big expenditure in your game, and also the repair cost. Some tanks are cheaper to repair. You can use the internet to find out what your repair costs are, and you can have a game that's more profitable based on going through your tanks and finding the one that's the cheapest to operate. There's a couple people ask, what type of tank do I use for this game? You want to have one tank that's very fast, one that has really strong frontal armor or all-around armor, one that has the highest penetration, and one that has the best DPM. And there might be other criteria. For example, for a fast tank, you would probably use one of the wheeled vehicles or a light tank, a fast one. The RU-251 used to do 95 kilometers, I believe, before they reduced it down to 90. And then the best armor is the Mutant. I don't remember the code number. It's got 290 millimeter armor. The Chrysler K is another good example. The Defender is another good example. So or the VK101 P, having that and you use it in the right situation. The best penetration is going to be something like the UDAS or the STRV, which has a penetration of something like 286 with regular rounds, which will which will destroy basically anything. It'll destroy all those strong armored tanks. And so for the fastest, just look at the speed. For the best armor, I would recommend the Mutant or maybe a T-28 or a Defender. You want to use the fast tanks when you have to scout, obviously, when you have to kill an objective that's far away. It takes about 2 minutes to drive from Cap D to Cap F with a fast tank. So if you're at Cap D and you have to help Cap F and you want to drive across, it's going to take you 2 minutes to get there. How do I know? Because I did the drive. With the best armor, like if you're on Cap C and your tanks keep getting destroyed, go out with a strong armored tank, and it's going to be more difficult for the enemy to destroy your tank. So you're not only going to have the best DPM and the best armor and the fastest, but you're going to use it in the proper situation. So for the best penetration, look at where I am on the mini-map. There's going to be tanks that are going to line up not exactly in this position, but a little bit to the left of it, and they're going to be very hard to penetrate. But if you have a high penetrating gun, you'll be able to penetrate their frontal armor. This tank is the EML, and the EML cannot penetrate the front of a lot of tanks with regular rounds. But when I pulled out the UDAS, it was destroying everything. The frontal armor of tanks cannot protect against an UDAS. So pulling out with the UDAS in the right sniping position. Over here you see there's a SU-130 PM. That's the position where you want to pull up with an UDAS, and you're going to be able to snipe the frontal armor. Another example is when the tanks start heading towards F and they use this corridor. You sit at the other end of the corridor with your high penetrating gun and you damage everything. So choose the right tank based on its characteristics for the right position. One of the strategies is that you want to use strong armor whenever you're assaulting a cap or if you're defending the final objectives. Whenever you need to stay alive, you want to use the strong armor, and the best tank is the Mutant. As long as you can protect your sides, the front of that is like 290 millimeters. It's practically impenetrable. When you play Frontline, you might want to play with different skills on your crew than when you play random battles. For example, you might not use repairs, or you might add repairs, or you might add firefighting, or you might not use Sixth Sense. There's a lot of decisions that you might make that make the game different. Spotting is less important in Frontline than camouflage, and the reason why is because when you play in Frontline, it's very collective. The collective of your team is going to help spot enemy tanks. Staying hidden your team doesn't help you stay hidden. So camouflage might have an advantage over spotting. When I play light tanks, I prioritize spotting over camouflage, even though when I was a new player, I prioritized camouflage over spotting. So you might want to put in different crew skills And I actually do that. When I pick my tanks, sometimes I have many crews members to choose from. I'll review their skills and pick the one that I think is best for the game mode. You can use personal reserves when you're playing Frontline. And one of the ones that's going to be really useful is going to be the credits, because you earn a lot more credits playing Frontline. So if you use credits, normally I only use credits when I play premium tanks because I want to get that extra bonus. And the other reason why is because I have 180 personal reserves, but I tend to run low on the free EXP and on the credits, and I tend to have more for crew and for EXP. So normally I don't use them as often, but I do use them in Frontline. So you might want to use a different tactic when you play Frontline. The other thing you want to do is avoid using the 2-hour the 2-hour personal reserves. And the reason why is because when you get to that 1 hour mark, if you, the personal reserve is used when you start the battle. If the time runs out, if your hour runs out, you still get the benefit of the personal reserve. So you can, and because the games can be 25 or 30 minutes long, you might be able to get an extra game in if you use 2 1-hour personal reserves as opposed to using 1 2-hour personal reserve. A typical game in Frontline is usually around 25 minutes. I've seen games under 20 minutes. I believe 17 minutes was one of the shorter games that I saw. And 25 is pretty common. And I think the longest I've seen is 27, 29, maybe up to 30 minutes, but definitely not over 30 minutes. So it is a pretty long game, and that's one of the reasons why you're not going to see it integrated with random battles, because random battles are a lot shorter. There's no friendly fire in World of Tanks Frontline, so you can hit your allies without doing damage. Now remember, you've got artillery strikes and air strikes, and you've got your gun, and you've got the SPG. So you might wonder, well, what if you drop an artillery strike on someone? And I've seen it happen. I've seen someone drop artillery strikes on enemy tanks that were immediately touching allies, and damage was done to the enemy and no damage was done to the ally. So I believe it's possible that even using combat reserves, you cannot damage an ally. I'm really not sure because I've been confused about this. But in general, you cannot do friendly fire damage to an ally. If you shoot at him, he's going to see that he got hit, and it will say your tank, and it will show a black bar, and it will say no penetration, and it will show the direction that it's coming from. So he's still going to know if you shoot at him, but it won't damage his tank. One thing about playing Frontline is that they will do it during a weekend that has some sort of a special that you might want to play. So if you look at, for example, missions, there might be really good missions during a time period that Frontline is playing. And the reason why this bothers me is because I like to play the 3 times victory, and I don't know why it's not showing for the day. Oh, I have it in Frontline mode. If I go to random battle mode, you're going to notice we're on a 3-time victory weekend. I only play when there's a 3-time, a 4-time, or a 5-time victory weekends. That's when I love to play. But sometimes they'll do that during a Frontline event. So you'll have to pick between the two. They will do this. If you like to play only the best events, that's one of the situations you're going to have to deal with. If you look at the Frontline regulations, in this case for 2019, you're going to find all the basic rules that are going to tell you how the game is played or how it might be different from a previous version. For example, we've got the schedule, we've got an overview, the tier that's going to be played. It talks about what the attackers do, what the defenders do, the size of the map. So you've got general, it talks about base capture points, objective hit points. You can see the armor for the objectives, an explanation of what overtime is, respawn mechanics, etc. So go look up this information for all the basic stuff. The reason why it's not in this video is because most players know this information, and I don't want to repeat what people already know. One way to avoid being spotted and to avoid the enemy aiming its guns at you is to stay near the red line whenever possible. It's good to protect the rear of your tank. It's good to be distant from the enemy. And the other reason why is because sometimes if you're at the red line, the enemy might have to turn their gun further in order to aim at you, which means they're less likely to do so. So get in the habit of traveling near the red line whenever you think it's a better strategy. It takes about 2 minutes to get from D to F if you have a relatively fast light tank. So almost all light tanks are going to take 2 minutes to cross over. One of the things that I did was I helped cap D, and then I came around the south and I helped cap E, and then I came around the south and I helped cap F. And when we were at D, we had around 2 minutes left at the game, and once we capped E, we had 2 minutes left in the game, and once we capped F, we had 2 minutes left in the game, and then with time remaining, we won the game. So you can make it. It's worth driving across. If you have a slow tank, for example, maybe you're at C and you spawned in a super heavy and you got to start heading north. It happens at B also. It can take a long time to advance north. So it might take 2 minutes to get from B to E if you have a slow tank like a T95 or a VK101P or the Maushin or a Mouse or something like that. So be aware of how much time it takes to get from one place to another. If you have a very fast tank, such as one of those wheeled vehicles, or an RU-251, you might be able to cross through the backfield very quickly. Another example is, let's say you're at F and you need to get to objective 4. You can't do it in 15 seconds. Even with a fast tank, you're still going to need like 25 seconds to be able to rush that objective to get that final shot in. And you'll notice that if you are respawning at F, getting to 5 takes a little bit more than getting to 4. So if you only got a few seconds left in the game, you might want to prioritize your objective based on which one is closer and how much time it takes to get there. You might want to do some experiments measuring how much time it takes to get from one place to another. For example, if you're on this side road on Cap C and you're defending, it takes a long time to get out. If you're down at the bottom and the enemy Cap C, it's really difficult, even if you have a fast tank, to get out of there in the amount of time that they give you, which I believe is 50 seconds. So measure those times and learn them. When you go to the menu here and select Frontline, you're going to come to a screen like this, and it will tell you the episode number and whether it's active. Perhaps there's a countdown that shows how many days are left, or in this case, it shows you when it will start, and it shows you your prestige level. So one of the issues you're going to also want to know is that there might be a ceasefire, which could be a couple hours long. And we're not sure why they do the ceasefire. It might be because they do it in the off-peak time when fewer people are queuing for battle. But the other reason why is because they need time to shut down the servers to back up the database, which is going to take like 15-20 minutes. One of the things that people will do, if they know that it's the last game, they might say, let the enemy cap, farm for damage, or they might say, don't kill the objectives right now, farm for damage. That's something that will happen if people know that the ceasefire is about to happen. So this is one of the things that you can do to see when the game is going to start and how much time is going to be left in the game. When you play Frontline, you're going to hear a lot of people complain. They say that the attackers win too much. I really don't believe this to be true. I have seen nothing, and I've played hundreds of games. I've seen nothing to make me believe that the attackers always win. If you look at the way the game is played, it should be more difficult for the attackers to win. It doesn't make sense, and like I said, I don't think it's really true. But it's something that everybody seems to believe. I have a lot of Frontline videos, instructional videos and tutorials on my YouTube account. This is what the page is probably going to look like, and that's me, obviously. And they are all clearly labeled. They'll say Frontline, and if you look at them, some of them are very good. Like you see this one says Frontline. Okay, that one's not that great. But you want to find those sniping videos. Look for the Frontline sniping videos like this one over here. It says sniping positions for Frontline. These are very, very, very informative. There is one that's not that good. It's probably this one because it only has 82 views, but most of them show in great detail all the sniping positions. And some of them look more like this, where I draw out on the mini map where to sit your tank. But you want to watch this type of a video. I'm going to show you a little. Always have clear shots against the tanks because there is a lot of obstruction on that ridge. Here's another view. There's a tree behind. This is the primary tree. What I did was I knocked the tree down because you always want to knock trees down in the air. Okay, so that's an example. That's not a good one. Let's try to find another one. Here's another sniping position. The greatest position. However, so you're going to see all the sniping positions that I've been playing and my opinion of how good they are and how effective they were. You're not going to see any gameplay necessarily, but you're going to see all the positions, how to get there, and I'll explain the optimal way to play them.